Welcome to the Gay Buddhist Forum, where teachers from all schools of Buddhism offer their perspectives on the Dharma and its application in modern times, especially for LGBTQI audiences. These talks are offered freely to the world and made possible by appreciative listeners. If you would like to support our efforts to share the Dharma with underserved audiences, please visit gaybuddhist.org. There you can donate, find a list of upcoming speakers, or enjoy many hundreds of these recorded talks dating back to 1996.
Thank you very much. And thank you to all of you who are here. And I'm really grateful for this hybrid model. I personally am getting over a cold and I didn't really want to share it with everybody. So it's great when I can arrive in this way. Also, I want to wish everyone a happy Lunar New Year. Today's the first day of the new year for many countries that follow the lunar calendar. And that's sort of what I'm going to talk about today. One of the things that happens for me around these transitions, both January 1st, but then also the Lunar New Year, is I sort of take it as an opportunity to clean house, to really think about what am I holding on to that maybe I don't need to, or what am I focused on that I don't need to, and then also to really start to consider the things that I hold on to. Why am I holding on to them? Why are they important? Why do they matter? And this includes my practice and the parts of my practice. And I think that it's a great opportunity for us to, especially because we also see new people coming around more often, or maybe people who haven't been here for a while begin to come around more often. And I think it's really great to sort of just consider for a moment, what is it that we're doing here? What is it that our practice is? What is it that we think we hope to achieve through all this? And what do we mean by that? I was also interviewed on Monday by a graduate student in comparative religion, and one of the questions they asked me was, what's the one thing that all lineages or streams of Buddhism have in common? And I had to really think about that. And I think it really sort of stems down to liberation, that we're all trying to figure out how to be free, how to be better able to sort of respond to the world around us in ways that don't perpetuate harm. And, you know, there are lots of definitions about what liberation means, you know, depending on the school of Buddhism, and maybe it's, you know, liberation into the Pure Land, or it might be extinguishment, it might be this, it might be that. But I think at the core of it all is really this question of, how do I live in the world in a way that frees me from the limitations of my own habits of mind, of my own old ideas and ways of thinking. And I'm going to start with something that one of my favorite books. When I first started practicing, somebody gave me this book, and it's by Norman Fisher, and it's called Taking Our Places, and I really love it. And it's a little beat up now and has lots of markings in it, but in it, he talks about listening and the skill of listening. And I think that when we're meditating, for those of us who meditate, that's kind of what the practice is. Like, we're listening to internal and external, and trying to hear the ways in which we have created a self. But Norman says it this way: perhaps the most common and pernicious form of non-listening is our non-listening to ourselves. So much of what we actually feel and think is unacceptable to us. We've been conditioned over a lifetime to simply not hear all of our own self-pity, anger, desire, jealousy, wonder. Most of what we take to be our adult response is no more than our unconscious decision not to listen to what goes on inside us. And as with any human relation, not listening to ourselves damages our self-respect. It occludes the free flow of love from ourselves to ourselves. To allow ourselves to feel what we actually do feel, not to be afraid or dismayed, but to open up a space inside our hearts large enough to safely contain what we feel, with the faith that whatever comes up is workable and even necessary. This is what any healthy, mature human being needs to do, and what we so often fail to do. And I think that paragraph in particular points to some of the difficulties we find, particularly when we're new to meditation or if we're going through a difficult time, which is that sometimes we take a look at ourselves, we take a look at our lives, and we don't necessarily like what we see there. We don't necessarily think that what we find there is our best part, or in keeping with how we see ourselves, or how we want to view ourselves, or how we want to present ourselves to the world. And so rather than sort of looking at that and making choices about how to allow that to inform us, we just kind of deny it or cut it off. And I think that's such a huge disservice, because I think that at the end of the day, we end up in this place of sort of confirmation bias. We think this way about ourselves, and so then everything that we allow to exist in our awareness just sort of confirms this idea that we have about ourselves, whether it's I'm a piece of shit or it's I'm the greatest thing since sliced bread, neither of which is actually true. And so I think it's really important that we begin to learn how to tell ourselves the truth, but also how to make space for ourselves inside of ourselves. W.S. Merwin writes this poem called To the Soul. And for those of you who aren't familiar with Merwin, he's a Buddhist and does a lot of sort of poetry that focuses on Buddhist ideas. He says, "Is anyone there? If so, are you real? Either way, are you one or several? If the latter, are you all at once, or do you take turns not answering? Is your answer the question itself, surviving the asking without end? Whose question is it? How does it begin? Where does it come from? How did it ever find out about you over the sound of itself, with nothing but its own ignorance to go by?" I'm going to read that again. Is anyone there? If so, are you real? Either way, are you one or several? If the latter, are you all at once, or do you take turns not answering? Is your answer the question itself, surviving the asking without end? Whose question is it? How does it begin? Where does it come from? How did it ever find out about you over the sound of itself, with nothing but its own ignorance to go by? And I think that this is such a beautiful, like I even to right this minute have goosebumps and chills just sort of thinking about the implications of these questions that he's asking, and the permission that is being offered here, this permission to, one, not know the truth, not be so convinced by the truth, that maybe the truth is not so clear cut, that maybe these thoughts I have about who I think I am or who I ought to be or who I should be or why I'm doing this or any of those things. Maybe none of that is important as much as what's here, what is it that I'm seeing when I sit down and I look at myself. What's underneath the stories I tell myself about myself and the world that I exist in? And what happens when we don't have answers to those questions, but we can just rest in the question? That maybe the answer is in the question itself. I know some Korean Zen traditions actually sort of put a lot of their emphasis on the practice of asking, who is it? And so they'll be sweeping the floor and they'll be asking, who's sweeping the floor? Washing dishes, who's washing dishes? But really sort of peering inside and asking ourselves, is it true, whatever it is, that we think or that we think, or that we feel about what we think? You know, the Buddha said that there's no independent, ongoing, consistent self, which leads me to the impression that I'm constantly creating ideas about myself or creating selves that get expressed in each moment. Which is why I think that really, whatever liberation is, it exists in this place that is an appropriate response, that it is the ability to kind of meet each moment wholeheartedly and what I find there and respond from that place. That's not my ideas or my thoughts or my judgments, but that place of genuine sort of interconnected, non-continuous thought process, or not even thought process, but knowing, right? Knowing beyond the thoughts and the ideas and opinions, but just kind of this place of settled uprightness. I think about when I have conversations with my friends and maybe one of them is suffering, and at the beginning of the conversation, I might struggle for thoughts or ideas. But as we get into each moment, I begin to notice my own ability to respond with things that I don't know that I necessarily know, but that feel genuine and connected, that I see as arising from that interdependent place, that place of honest connection and awareness of the connection. I often tell people that when I'm giving a talk, my hope is that I can sit down and settle enough that I'm not giving the talk, but that everybody else is giving the talk. My lips just happen to be the ones that are flapping. That I can set aside my agenda and my ideas and allow our collective wisdom, our collective awareness, our collective liberation to speak on our behalf. Some days I'm really good at it, some days I'm not. But I think the other really important part of Buddhist practice is we just keep trying. We just keep trying to settle. We just keep trying to turn the light inward and learn more about ourselves and the ways that we think and feel and operate, and our ideas about all of it, of life. I think the Lunar New Year, any new year, is an opportunity for us to really take stock of ourselves, our lives, our ideas, our feelings, and ask ourselves, is this real? Is this true? Or is this just some habit that I've developed over the lifetime of trying to be something or someone, to live up to some ideal that I put in place that maybe is or isn't true? But either way, it's just me trying to do my best. Norman Fisher goes on to say, the practice of listening has many depths and many dimensions. In Zen mind, beginner's mind, Suzuki Roshi speaks of true listening as emerging from what he calls beginner's mind, the mind that is willing to remain receptive and open to surprise. Such a mind is always ready and alert, willing to receive what comes. It has few preconceptions. Unlike the expert's mind, which filters everything through our expertise, beginner's mind is innocent and fertile. So I sit down and I take a deep breath and I begin to listen. I start with listening to my body, listening to what's happening in the sense gates. And I settle into that process. And sometimes my mind gets distracted, but I return. Maybe I hear something and that leads me off into some distraction or separation. And then I become aware and I come back to this body, this mind, this heart, this listening. I think sometimes when we start our practice, or at various times in our practice, it becomes really hard to listen that much, to listen that well. We have to face down some of our demons, some of our difficulties, some are our less than perfect ways of existing in the world. The awareness that we've hurt people or caused harm. The moments when we're powerless. And so I think it's really important that we remember that maybe the answer is the question, and to just keep there and listening and letting those places tell us how to care for them, how to be responsible for them. But to not give up on ourselves, to not give up on our practice, to not give up on what it is that we're trying to find, to not give up on liberation. And also to not think that because I've had moments of liberation that I am therefore somehow free. Because at the end of the day, after those deeply connected moments, I wake up and I'm still me, and I still screw up, and I still fall short, and I still meet parts of myself that I am not necessarily thrilled with, or parts of myself that I am completely thrilled with, but I don't seem to access as much as I would like. And so even in those moments of liberation, I have to just keep practicing. I just have to keep turning inward, keep asking the questions. Who is it that's sitting here? Who is it that has this thought? Who is it? And it's not about the story of who it is. It's about the nature of that experience of who it is. So speaking of collective wisdom, I want to I'll end with reading Merwin again, and then invite you to share your wisdom, to bring in your thoughts, ideas, questions about your own practice. Called To the Soul. Is anyone there? If so, are you real? Either way, are you one or several? If the latter, are you all at once, or do you take turns not answering? Is your answer the question itself, surviving the asking without end? Whose question is it? How does it begin? Where does it come from? How did it ever find out about you? Over the sound of itself, with nothing but its own ignorance to go by. I hope that you'll take this opportunity of the turning of the new year to take stock, to pay attention, to just keep practicing, to explore the moments of liberation, but also those moments that are not liberation. Thank you very much. Please feel free to ask your questions, or if you don't want to ask questions in front of the large group, which is sometimes hard for some of us, I would ask, you can write it in the chat and I'll see it, or you can chat me privately and I'll see it. Or if you're in the room, I also invite you to speak loudly, because even in the best of circumstances, I'm kind of hard of hearing, so. Is it Steve?
Yes. Well, hi. Thank you so much for your talk today. I think it was a perfect talk for the new year, and I'm a practicing poet, and I really enjoyed the poem that you shared, and it really resonates with me. And just your whole talk, I took a bunch of notes, and I really appreciate you being here.
Thank you very much.
Hey Daigan, it's Grisha. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you, Grisha. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for your talk. And it brought up just more questions. I have a friend who's a graphic designer. He has this t-shirt that has a picture of a human head with a blender as the brain. And the caption is, "I don't process, I puree." And you know, the reading of the poem and your talk made me think about, like, well, you know, if any thought enters my mind, it goes through 400,000 filters immediately. you said something about the expert. I don't claim that there's any expert. I wish there were an expert. And so it's like, yeah, which voice do you give the most, give the most value to? Just this morning, gratefully, a friend of mine, a generous friend of mine, sent me a plane ticket to Barcelona. I go there for the summer sometime. And, but I usually stop and see my family on the East Coast, and I don't want to. And then 1,000 voices fire off in my head, and I go around the Dharma wheel. Right intentions, right voice, right actions, right, right. And I guess the question is, which voice do you listen to? Where do you tune in the most? Just asking out.
So there's an easy answer to that question for me, and then there's the hard one. The easy answer for me is it's usually the voice that is the most quiet. It's the voice that all the other voices sort of talk over. Because it's often the voice that comes from that place of settled connection and just sort of settled uprightness, and the experience of hearing myself over and over and over again. I start to recognize the other voices. I start to recognize, oh, that's the tape of all the kids when I was in high school, or that's the tape of, my parents or the church or my brothers. And this is the tape of my expectations about how to keep myself safe. And so I begin to recognize all the other voices. And by not trying to stifle them, but just allowing them to be there and to not fight with them, but also not follow them, I begin to find quiet. And in that quiet, there's a voice that begins to talk that it's really interesting. My teacher used to say, "What does your practice ask of you?" And this quiet voice in the midst of that momentary silence that I can hear just barely under the surface, that's the answer to what my practice is asking of me. It's always the quietest voice. And sometimes we think it's the right voice to follow, and then we get there and realize, oops, it's time to do something different. That was a mistake, or that was something that wasn't the right answer. And so we just pick up and we try again. I hope that was helpful.
Yes, thank you. The little quiet voice. I'll be listening.
Daigan, I have a question.
Okay.
You make a distinction between paying attention to who's asking the question and the nature of maybe the nature of who's asking the question, or the nature of the question.
Mm-hmm.
Where can you shed some light on where you start looking at the nature, or how you start looking at the nature as distinct from who's the person?
Yeah, I think that for me, it begins with looking past my thoughts and opinions and learning to distinguish between thoughts, opinions, and ideas about something and the actual experience of something. And the more that I sort of work with that unraveling of my process, of my existence, I begin to start to see and am able to notice, like, oh, wait, no, that's just my opinion about this thing, or that's just this thought I have that is ancient, or that's some conclusion I drew last year and is not necessarily true today. So it's the process of looking underneath what we think we know, what we think, what we think we feel, into some experience of the actual experience of it. It's like the difference between thinking about the feel of your hand on your other hand and the way that that feels, but then also the actual experience of that feeling. Did that make sense?
Yeah, very helpful. Thank you.
Tom has his hand up.
Tom?
Oh, Tom.
Yes. Hi, Daigan. Thank you so much. I think that maybe you've sort of touched on it already, perhaps answered from different angles. But I was thinking that, maybe you could speak to the idea that we are not any one of those voices, any one of those questions, that it's more about connecting with the formless and the unconditioned, like the space between the questions, the void, the silence between the thoughts, that's perhaps where we really exist. Or, I mean, these are words, right? Words never do justice to trying to connect with this thing. But can you speak a little bit about that? Like, because sense formations, mind formations, they're the form.
Right.
But what about the formless? Where do we go to connect with the formless?
So I think that there's two thoughts that arise for me about that. One is that we have to be careful in thinking that the formless is better or more important than the forms. They both arise simultaneously, and they should both be experienced simultaneously. Because the only, at least in my experience, the only avenue that I have to the formless is by deeply sinking into the formed. By really connecting to the formed, and because they arise simultaneously, if I'm deeply settled into this will become easier to see because they're together. And, I think sometimes, particularly in Buddhist circles, we sometimes want to skip over the difficult work of what happens in the formed realm to rest in this idea of formlessness, thinking that that is actually liberation, but it's not. Liberation is when we have both. Liberation is when we are able to rest in both. I have never had the experience of formlessness that didn't include the formed. And I've been doing this about 30 some odd years. And I don't know anybody else who's, and I have connections with people who've been practicing for 60 years or more. And I don't know that they have ever had the experience. No one has ever expressed to me that that was possible. Because when you start to question them about their connection to the formless, they talk about forms and that was their connection. And at the end of the day, we have to get up off our cushion and exist in a world that is forms. And so the real question is, how do I do that in a meaningful way? And I can't connect to that in a meaningful way if I just want to spend all my time in the formless realm. that's just spiritual bypass to me. That's just spiritual bypass to me. And yes, it's hard. We have to talk about this stuff in words. And so Katagiri Roshi said, you know, there's nothing to say, and yet I got to say something. Yeah, I hope that was helpful.
Yeah, great insight and instruction. Thank you very much.
Chris.
Hi, thanks for a great talk, Daigan. That poem sounded like a description of internal family systems or something. Or all the disparate parts on both sides of my brain that are kind of operating on and off throughout the day. I was just listening to some teachings right before I came to this group. I came late by Gil, and Gil was talking about how we imagine our ego, how we imagine ourselves, the imagining that occurs. Partially, and then I'm also taking a 8-week retreat on primarily awareness. And so we're working right now with just noticing, just continually to try to draw your mind back or your person back to just noticing what's occurring. And what's arising a lot for me, as it always has, is if I'm just careful to look, is the wide range of hindrances that start to occur that sort of tint my ability to see clearly. And when those disappear, when they do sometimes on the cushion, if I'm sort of a deep, sort of centered samadhi, pity arises, the hindrances seem to drop away. So I get that little buzz that we all sort of enjoy with sitting, that relaxation that occurs with rapture and tranquility and sort of equanimity starts to arise. But most recently, I'm also attending a group where we're reading the Lojong teachings. We're actually using Norman's book on compassion. The Lojong teachings are a series of slogans that go way back, and specifically in the Tibetans, going back to like Atisha, like the 600s or 800s or something. And the slogans are great. They're just sort of ideas to sort of open up our own awareness and bodhicitta, our sort of thrust for practice, our the beauty that arises, the compassion, the sort of altruistic sort of things that arise when we just are clear. And most recently, the slogan is, you know, treat everything as a dream. Just look at everything as a dream. Sort of, that's what can be very confusing, but it's just a fun thing to play well. And when I want to toss stuff away, toss stuff out in a sense, or relieve myself from this pain I'm carrying in a way, which just goes back to the Buddhist saying is, why are we doing this? For me, it's to decrease my suffering and the suffering I cause others. That's for me the bottom line. And these practices really seem to help. But what I was going to offer out was, if I'm in that dilemma, like, which is probably hourly, of like, who am I? Why is this occurring? If I'm not able to see the hindrance, I'm going outside these past few days. It's nice and clear in San Francisco. The vista of the ocean is just gorgeous, just a few blocks away. You know, you look outside of the ocean and see the sky, and there's like an awe moment. And the awe moment makes me sort of disappear, and all these sort of ideas and concepts just sort of float away and disappear and kind of actually get composted back down into my psyche. Or if I'm on the cushion or even off the cushion, I often will just go to the space right here between my brain or my chin and my heart. And there seems to be something physically that's percolating in my body. I can feel that sort of a tension arise on a real subtle level. And if I don't try to cognitively put a statement to what that is, and really just look at imagery that's coming forth, or just energies that are just constriction. If I just sort of sit with that imagery comes up, there's something that gets relieved. And from that, I feel very creative. There's like a creativity that starts to occur. So that's kind of how I'm working. A lot what you said this morning has really brought that up for me. And then I go out and sin in my life, and then I have to come back to the Christian. But anyway, thanks.
Thank you very much, Chris. And I just want to say I adore Gil and have so much respect for him. And Yeah, he sometimes he just hits me over the head with stuff, and I and I just have to go, oh God, yeah. So every time I hear his name, I just think of how much I really adore him and think he's awesome. So yeah. And the Lojong teachings are, you know, to me that it often feels like a master class, like you know, when you're in college, you go to these sort of first level classes, and then but Lojong teachings are, you got to have some stability before you can really pick them up and not get lost in them.
Yeah, I would agree, actually. I tried to pick these up like 20 years ago, and I was like, huh? And then about 10 years ago, I was like, well, maybe I should look at these later. And now they're really meeting me, and I'm not over conceptualizing with them. I'm just using like sort of a statement to kind of reflect on which is really causing me
No,
to assist with compassion to come forward.
no.
Anyway,
No.
thanks.
Thank you all very much for your practice and for being here and coming together, and making this space available. I think that what we do here really matters as queer people, as a community. And so I'm really grateful that this exists and that you support it and that you show up.